Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Keith Haney. Today's guest is someone who brings deep insight, spiritual wisdom, and psychological expertise to the conversation about leadership and personal growth. Reverend Dr. Greg Stewart is a full-time telehealth counselor, executive coach, consultant based in Rockwell, Texas, with a background that spans pastoral ministry, organizational development, and executive coaching. Greg holds degrees in organizational leadership, divinity, counseling, and a PhD in counselor education and supervision. His newest book, 13 for Leaders, Unleash the Rage of Negative Emotions Against the Obstacles of Becoming More, is a bold, transformative guide to leadership. It challenges us to rethink how we view negative emotions, not as liabilities, but as powerful tools for growth, clarity, and impact. Let's welcome Dr. Greg to the podcast. How you doing, Dr. Greg?
I am doing wonderful, sir. How are you? And thank you for the honor of having me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I love talking to other doctors who are also reverends who are doing great things in leadership. So we should have a phenomenal conversation.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. I'm going to ask you my favorite question to start off. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I'm going to go two. The first one is when I was going through a difficult leadership time where me and my boss, as a matter of fact, I was a senior pastor, I was the associate pastor, had a falling out. And another associate pastor who actually mentored me, he said, Greg, one day this will be over, right? This season will be over. You want to be able to look back and say you would not have changed a thing in how you responded. And that piece of advice has carried me through just, we all go through difficult times, but just in the moment, it's so difficult, but you want to be able to look back and say you wouldn't change a thing in how you responded. The second one was I turned into a principal where my senior pastor was like, I was lamenting because I got my bachelor's degree, is getting ready to go to seminary. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's such a big deal. And he had already had his doctorate and he was like 35 years my senior. And he was just kind of looking at me and goes, well, Greg, you're not walking a road since haven't walked before you. Right. So I always ask the question, honestly, in so many ways, to myself, even like, Greg, has there anybody who has it more difficult than you and yet was successful? Is anybody that's had it busier than you or whatever you want to put in the word and yet was successful? The answer is yes. So what did they do? So it gets you focused off the problem onto the solution.
That's all good advice. I like that. Very, very good. I'll have to
Two
borrow
for one.
those.
Yeah.
So your book has a very provocative title, Unleash the Rage of Negative Emotions. What inspired you to write this?
Okay. So it actually was my first book. So this would be the third book in the trilogy. And it's weird. I have a different title. It's like I Cubed. So I was a math major in my undergrad. So that's where the cube piece comes in. But it's the rage, like the first one has to do with like walking into our negative emotions instead of avoiding them. Right. And I have a whole process for doing that. My second book is for couples, which is basically facing our negative emotions. This one, I take a different stance, like because our negative emotions come from the development of our mission statement. So both with internally of, I want to become more. That's my business, becoming more. And I unleash the rage, meaning I see this vision of who I could be and I want to get there. So I'm going to unleash rage against the obstacles, which are my weaknesses, my shortcomings, or the things stopping me from becoming more. When it comes to a mission statement, and we can get into this of the formation of mission statement with God is like that every job ever, every technological advancement ever is either trying to solve a human problem or enhance the human experience. So when I help people develop their mission statement, I ask them, I said, what is one problem in the world that you cannot stand? Like, man, and there's a million problems. So what would you want to fix? Is it poverty? Is it racism? Is it, not being able to fulfill your calling, whatever it is? And that turns this holy discontent, this holy fire inside of you. So unleash the rage because it's about you aligning with God's anger against the ails, the sin of the world, and getting it down to how it impacts our soul. That's where we align with God. So it's a little bit of a different take of using this negative energy and rage of it should be different. I should be different. The world should be different. And then your rage against the obstacles that is keeping it from getting there.
I love that. And how do you focus? Because you think of rage as one of those things that's kind of a emotion, right, a passion, but it's a fleeting passion. How do you maintain the rage to keep pushing for that thing that you're aiming for?
Well, the rage is like, I call it creating a mission statement. I call it the Iron Man core. Like if you of course saw the movie, that once that bomb exploded and the doctor put that energy source in the Iron Man core, the goal of it was to keep the shrapnel that was burning its way to his heart away. So I call the shrapnel like life's annoyances. Like, just because I've seen people, if they don't have this purpose, destiny, and calling, that shrapnel of life's annoyances just kill us. But once we have that energy source, it's inexhaustible. So when we think about like why we're doing this, like I have a rage against mediocrity, right? I know I know the Lord's against mediocrity. And so whenever I see it play out in someone's life, obviously I wanted to use a cool word like rage, right? But it's not like I'm, just foaming at the mouth, but it's just rage against the ramifications to the human soul and what this person could be versus how they're doing. They're stuck in mediocrity. So it's just when you remember that mission, when you remember why, it just flares up inside of you. And again, it's related to God's calling and purpose for our life. So it's not just we think of one. Every time I've helped somebody develop a mission statement, it always links back to their life experiences. So even getting deeper of when we hear like Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way they should go. Of course, there's morality involved in that, but it really has to do with the word for way. Derek is a Hebrew word, which is more of your own personal path. So as parents, we see what God's doing in our children's lives and their experiences, their personal experiences turns into this. All the great movies, TV shows, like it always links back to that, right? Where somebody says, "Oh, I figured out what I was born to do," right? And then that becomes this energy source of rage of I want to fix this.
Like that. I almost wanted to ask you, how can you be a Cowboys fan? But I won't.
Actually, I'm not.
Okay, well, good. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we're good there.
So let's talk about this. You introduced the concept of 13 too. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's I cubed, right? So yeah, on the text, it's like you look in the book, it's more clear. All right. So I cubed, and this is the piece where I've had for like 20 some odd years. And it's just a technique I came up with 20 some odd years ago, actually, when I was a pastor. And it's just a technique to kind of like stop my emotions and help me process. Okay. So I kind of liken it onto the Panama Canal. So the principle is, of course, the first lock has to fill up before the second lock opens. So I cubed information, interpretation, intensity, right? So information, that first lock has to fill up before the lock of interpretation opens up. So here's a rule that it is illegal. I like using that word. It's illegal for me to have any opinion, interpretation, or any emotion, intensity until I have all the information. Now, imagine like with all of us as human beings, it's so easy for us to jump to conclusions. I mean, look at our society and look at our world. Imagine if, brother, if this one principle was applied, it's illegal. You cannot form an opinion and you can't have any emotion until you have all of the information. So as a pastor, people come up to me and say this or that. I'm like, well, I'm going to pause. Like, I need to get more information because so many times like people are processing the what ifs, but like you can't, and we're just cycling and you can't draw a conclusion until you need more information. So you burn that emotional energy to get the information, right? So once that's full, then there is interpretation. This is where critical thinking comes in. So with the information that you have, interpretations, you begin with it's negative, neutral, positive. Of course, you begin with the negative because that's where you're at emotionally. But the key thing there is you ask, okay, is there any other way of thinking about this? Okay. That is critical thinking, meaning, again, it pauses your emotion that there are probably several statements that are true, possible ways to interpret the information. So I said, you have your own interpretation, which obviously you're emotionally committed to, but then ask the question, if somebody vehemently disagreed with me, and they were right, how would they interpret it? And again, somewhere in between, there's several statements of interpretation. Then out of that information interpretation comes intensity. How much emotional energy do I need to respond to this? Like, what's the most effective way to respond to it? And then how much emotional energy do I need? So your intensity just kind of naturally gets to the right amount. So negative emotion isn't bad. It's just we want the right amount of it. So that's the IQ process.
Well, that makes sense. I like the image you gave of the water flowing up through
the Panama Canal. Right,
Panama
right.
Canal.
And of course, it was in the news right at the beginning of Trump's thing, like, redoing that. So it was a perfect time to talk about it, right? So it fit perfectly.
Exactly. So your book uses Bloom's taxonomy, specific upper levels of analysis, synthesis, evaluation as a framework. Why did you choose that particular model? I'm sure we were always picking different ways to kind of explain stuff, but why did you choose that model?
So Bloom's taxonomy, like it's six, like a pyramid, it's 6 ways of thinking. So the bottom 3 levels we're all familiar with because it's like, it's grade school, elementary through high school. So it's basically knowledge, comprehension, application, right? It makes sense. So that's just logical. But the top three, it's analysis, synthesis, evaluation. So analysis means that, and the reason why I choose this is because it came from like, which we'll get into the leadership quotient, the four key pieces, and it had to do with critical thinking, that you could have, a people around a table who are all of similar, backgrounds, expertise, they have similar resumes, but there are ways to critically think through something that uses something like Bloom's taxonomy. So the analysis is you break down all the theories, right? So even in business strategy, based upon different industries, there are theories developed on not only how to approach that industry, but also how to approach the business strategy for the current season. So analysis of breaking it down, and basically you're always going after blind spots, right? You're always going after blind spots, and you're always not just looking for, like, people always think the best business strategy is, being able to forecast the future, but you just simply can't, right? And so what you have to do is go against your core assumptions. So there's use the book by Peter Senge called The Fifth Discipline, and it goes after the core business assumptions. And I love the example he uses, but basically of General Motors back in the late 70s. They had literally core business assumptions listed, things like the American car market is isolated from the rest of the world, right? Another business assumption they had was people care more about comfort than they do quality, right? And different things. So those core business assumptions that they held to and based their entire model for their industry, that's why there was this big Japanese rush in the 80s of cars. I know I'm kind of dating myself, obviously, but people look at those core business assumptions now and laugh, but guys, they were geniuses, obviously, to be the top brass of GM. So my point is that all of us, whether it be on an individual basis or a senior leadership team basis, we have core assumptions, and that analysis piece is breaking them down and challenging core business assumptions, again, kind of like I cubed, and coming at it from several different ways, saying what other assumptions are out there or could we make, or what assumptions are we making that we need to kind of rethink. And then the synthesis is putting it back together and reestablishing it. So it's all based on those top three rungs of critical thinking. Then evaluation is just that ongoing process. So it's really about the critical thinking. How can I incorporate? And there's many different ways of doing critical thinking. Like I'm doing a lot of reading on philosophy and the Socratic questioning method. So I'm doing a deep dive into that, but I wanted to add that piece because by definition, that how do we increase our influence as people? Like leadership is influence. I still, John Maxwell's definition, leadership is influence. So how do people gain influence? Well, critical thinkers, oh my goodness, that is certainly a piece among others. So I try to do exactly that with leadership, is break down all the leadership theories and bring them back together. And then critical thinking was a piece of that.
So if you're executive coaching someone, how do you begin to walk them through this process to kind of define what are their core principles, what are their beliefs? How do you kind of pull it apart and then put it all back together?
Right. So I begin with, like, when I do coaching. So first, my first chapter of the book is on becoming more, which simply means it's just the psychobabble process of changing our mental models, right? We always have to change our mental models because they're formed, but they have weaknesses. But then in chapter 2, I talk about the becoming more quotient, which is those 4 areas. So it's IQ, which we're born with an IQ, can't change that, but we maximize our IQ through formal and informal education. That's first. Now, I say that there's PhDs walking around all over the place, not because they attain it formally, but at the level of a PhD, they have such an expertise on the given topic that they could qualify for a PhD. So that's informal and formal education. Then number 2 is critical thinking skills. So critical thinking skills it's not an IQ thing. It's a skill we can learn. So that's IQ. And then there's the interplay between emotional intelligence. So IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, and then personality. I say that I don't know how you can have a discussion on leadership without discussing personality. And I don't know how you can have a discussion on leadership without discussing emotional intelligence. And those two interplay together. So it's personality ran through the machine of emotional intelligence that turns into your interpersonal and intrapersonal inside of you effectiveness. Because our personality, when people have our weaknesses, what are our weaknesses? Anytime you describe somebody's weaknesses, it's that they can become too blank. Well, you're too assertive, you're too passive, you're too non-directional, or you're too critical, your paralysis of analysis. All of that comes from our personality. right? So that's a strength taken too far. Or when, people would say that, to me, like, hey, Greg, can you just not be you right now? Right? It just it means that I'm being myself, but the situation needs me to be something else. And that's the interplay between personality and emotional intelligence. Because when we think through the leaders that we've been under, if we think back, it was their personality that was not done in an emotionally intelligent way is what caused the damage, or where they kind of turned us off or frustrated us or made us angry, whatever it is. It's because it was an uncontrolled, non-emotionally intelligent personality. And number 4 has to do with spiritual development and destiny. That piece is where I begin with a mission statement. That's actually the foundation of a leader, is that mission statement piece.
So tell me more about the spiritual development and destiny part, because I really love to dig into that, because I've done so many studies on leaders who get critical thinking, maybe even have gotten to the point where they're really in tune with the EQ part of it, emotional part of it, but the spiritual development and destiny part. Because I just had a guest on who works with high functioning, executives who've achieved great success, but now they're burning out because they don't have an off switch, and they've sold out their soul to get to that thing they keep going for the goalpost for.
Yeah. So, all right. So spiritual development, like it's actually like ethics and moral development. Like almost every person or company, has their list of values, and integrity is a part of it. Now, again, when I'm looking at the best leaders, the upper echelons of leaders, so there's like, formal power and informal power. So formal is like your position, that you have knowledge and expertise power, and coercive and reward power, which is, it's necessary, but without the informal power of relationship, charisma, and referent. Referent power is the top level, which means that I am going to follow you because it's you. Why? Because you have stood the test of time. You don't not only have the skills. I believe that leaders who get to that level of like their upper echelon of referent power is because they passed the integrity moral development test. That ultimately leaders, that they put other people, the mission or whatever it is, above themselves. And when it causes them pain and they put themselves, it causes them ramifications, and then they come through and they were right. It's like, man, you have integrity. I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. So that's spiritual development. Spiritual destiny is our mission statement. So this is where I'll say that I take people back to Genesis 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, you might have heard here's a big theological term, meta-narrative, the grand story. So Genesis 1 and 2, everything was wonderful, of course. Genesis chapter 3, everything goes to hell, like literally. And then Genesis 4 on to today until new heavens, new earth is both God and man responding to what happened in Genesis 3. So you look in chapter 4 of Genesis, and it says, these descendants started becoming shepherds and herdsmen. These descendants started making tools. And then these descendants started making musical instruments. And when I saw the musical instruments, I was like, that's interesting. So I stepped back and said, you know what? When it came to mankind starting to respond to the impact of the curse, and not only that, just starting to be fruitful and multiply, like the shepherds and herdsmen has to do with the foundation, like commodities, and then the social structure. Like this is the ongoing, it's never going to change stuff that needs to be run well. That's the foundation of society. Tools, that's where every technological advancement is trying to solve a human problem. Everything is trying to keep things from going south and make things better. But musical instruments is underneath the category of enhancing the human experience. So whatever it is, like Howard Schultz, I talk about Howard Schultz and Starbucks. It was on that end where it was not about solving a problem, obviously. It had to do with, he had a vision for the maximization of the human experience. Matter of fact, when I wrote this book, I describe it in the book, I was on a cruise, and I'm sitting there, I'm on a cruise. This has everything to do with enhancing the human experience, nothing to do with solving a human problem. So there are people, of course, that and I talked about the guy who started the cruise lines, that again, a vision for what could be. So that's the spiritual development destiny that, again, we've seen it everywhere, and even in movies and different things where people just know their calling. And I'll say one final thing on this, Keith, is I can't tell you how many guys, how many men reached out to me to get help for counseling because they're around 35 to 40, whatever, and the age, and they could be successful, but they just basically say, this it. Like I'm a director or VP in my company, or I actually had one time, I had two doctors at the same time. They didn't know each other. One was an anesthesiologist, one was a radiologist, and they came to me at the same time with the same thing. Now they were making, they were going to leave their careers, but they were like making $300K a year, and they're like, still had this emptiness inside. Like, is this it? Well, I automatically knew every time I get that, guy after guy after guy comes to me, and that's what's missing. It's that Iron Man core. And it's, they're just, because God is just, there's this vacuum there and that has to be filled. And that's our mission statement and our purpose and destiny.
That's great. And it kind of brings me up to this other question of, you talk a lot about micro emotional goals. How do you help people balance the career versus their daily lives as leaders?
All right. So one is, as far as this comes back to my first book. So I described that literally everything we do, every decision we make, and this is just as humans, so leaders or not, we're trying to achieve an emotional goal, right? So that's a fancy way of saying we want to feel something. So I was thirsty, my throat was dry. I don't like that feeling. So I took a drink. So that's a micro emotional goal. If I'm hungry, I eat. If I'm tired, I sleep. But then always off to the side, as we're going through our day and life, we just want to feel something. But off to the side here is our macro emotional goals, which are, I want to increase my quality of life, kind of as broken down into increase my standard of living, logically, right? We're all trying to do that, and live my values and fulfill destiny, calling, and purpose. Now, again, we might use different words, but every human being is in this process, right? So as we're doing that, it's just like, it's natural. It's part of our DNA structure. That's what we're trying to do. Like the way we raise our kids and the way we just operate with anything. That's what we're trying to do. So that's in that journey, in that process, it's how we respond, what paths we take to achieve those goals. So we have to choose, I use the phrase rational, healthy, wise, and right. So a lot of times we will choose, and we'll want to have a feeling, like I use in the book, my favorite one is if I'm stressed out, right? So my micro emotional goal is I don't want to be stressed. But I choose the pathway of drinking alcohol every day at 5 to alleviate that. It achieves the emotional goal, but it doesn't pass the rational, healthy, wise, and right test. So we have to assess paths, but secondly, we have to assess what happens when those goals are blocked, especially the macro. Now that's where, like, all of us get tested, like with our personality. We're going to respond to that blocked goal in where we feel the most comfortable, which is our temperament. We're going to become, again, too, T-O-O, assertive, too spontaneous, or whatever, to try and achieve those emotional goals. And it's that blending. So in the becoming more, it's like everyone becomes what they want to, only some people think about becoming more, which means the want to is our mental model. So our mental model only has so much like information in it, and we have formulas by which we process information. Well, a long time ago, Keith, I said to myself, look, I know my mental model is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? It's just the way I interpret things sometimes, it doesn't take but 5 seconds to realize how wrong I am, how I'm interpreting it incorrectly. So there's a constant process of maximizing, of course, information, but also changing my mental model formulas to be the most effective. And the other piece is the blind area. It's called the Johari window, where I have a blind area. We all do. Well, what is your strategy? If we all have a blind area, what is your strategy for eradicating it? And we all can look back and look at other people in our life and say, wow, they're blind. Right? Well, how are we going to eradicate our blind areas? The only way to do it is what I call proactive teachability, is we go to each other and say, how can I grow? How can I change? Right? And we have to do it proactively. We can't wait for people to come up to us, because people just won't. They don't want conflict. So we have to go to people proactively, like asking people, hey, are you a good listener? Yeah, I think I'm a good listener. Have you ever asked the people that you're listening to if they feel heard by you? All right. Are you a good parent? Yeah, I think I'm a pretty good parent. Have you ever asked your kids how you can be a better parent? Right? Or are you a good spouse? Right? Right? Have you ever asked your spouse how you can be a better spouse? So we just simply have blind areas. So in that transformation of the mental model, that's how we continue to work at becoming more.
I love it. So what kind of feedback are you receiving from your readers about your 13 framework?
So when I hear back, like as far as like, and I introduce it, then we apply it. So like I'll meet with them, and then they will take an exact situation of the I cubed and say information, duration, intensity. And then when they actually start applying it, because I had this one gal, I met with her this week, where she was going through divorce, and she met with the judge, and the judge basically said, this isn't going to work as far as your divorce contract. Well, her husband's like not the most amicable guy, and she was like worried, like what's going to happen here and all that. And I said, and she had a meeting with the lawyer tomorrow, and she was doing all this processing. I said, you have to stop because you don't have the information. And of course, if you don't have all the information, you're filling in all the blanks with what? The worst possible outcome, right? I mean, we all do that. So in that sense, when you see it applied and then realize that what we're doing, that's the feedback you get from the clients, or whether it be leaders. Because, and it's funny, like in my books, I put the chapter on I cubed at the end, because I want to go through the process, whether it be my book on individual counseling or couples counseling or leadership. And at the end, all right, here's the summary, because you can take like each one of those and then kind of pull in the rest of the book and all the principles. But the IQ process is like a very succinct way to incorporate all that. It's kind of like your takeaway, if you will. There's lots of different takeaways, but at least the one formula that's easy to remember is I cubed: information, interpretation, intensity.
So this has been a mind-blowing IQ conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'd love to ask my guest this question. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that Jesus was my first love. Honestly, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that as like the right answer. There's nothing else that I want, because it's not even being a Christian. I believe there's two decisions. There's one for salvation, which is a gift, but then there is making the choice to be a disciple, to leave all to follow him. But even outside of all that, it's not just about acts and obedience. It's he's my first love and he's my fiance. So, and then legacy, that's why I wrote these books. And in fact, my first book, I'm writing this book because I'm putting, Greg's thoughts on paper, because I just we had our first grandson born back in February. So he's a Stewart. He's my son's son. So obviously it's easy to be motivated by that legacy of my grandson as I'm looking into his eyes, holding him. This is the future Stewart generation. It's like, I want these books to be there. So it's not just like my legacy of grandpa he loved Jesus, but yet he pushed and he did not stop maximizing his bell curve, like mediocrity. That's my mission statement, is to blow away the bell curves. Like there's 100 Gregs on this bell curve. So forget everybody else. There's 100 Gregs as far as being a counselor, a leadership coach, or a father, a husband, grandfather. And I want constantly pushing to be that 100 percentile Greg. So really those two things of Jesus was my first love and fiance, and I was unceasing to get up to that 100 percentile Greg. I never, ever stopped growing and debating myself. Forget other people, debate yourself first.
That's great. I love that. I love that focus. On season 6 of the podcast, we're doing something new. We're asking the guests to pick a number for their surprise question. Pick a number between 1 and 6 for your surprise question.
I was going to say 8 because it's my favorite number. Okay, I'll say number 5.
Number 5. This is one of my favorites. If you got stuck in an elevator and were forced to listen to one song, what song would you pick?
In fact, we just did this question for if you had 5 minutes to live, what song would you? We just did this for a small group the other week. The song I'd pick, it's a song that talks about heaven, where he talks about standing on the shore, and then when I'm on that shore and I finally pass from here to there, and then I see Jesus, kind of thing. So I would probably pick that song, and of course, or Amazing Grace. You can never go wrong with Amazing Grace. Those would be the two songs.
Awesome.
I know you ask for one and I give you 2 every time. I'm sorry.
You just don't follow the rules.
Yeah, I know. See,
you're always IQ and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
So Greg, where can people find you and buy your books and learn more about you?
drgregstewart.com. It's just simply DRGREG Stewart, EW, not you. No period. It's just drgregstewart.com. Yeah, you can see my name on the podcast. Just take out the period. There you go.
Well, Greg, thanks for sharing your wisdom, your powerful framework for leaders. Your IQ Leaders is more than just a book. It's a call to action for anyone ready to confront their inner resistance, embrace emotions, and lead with integrity and purpose. To our listeners, if you're a leader, coach, or someone striving to become more, the book is a must-read. It will challenge your thinking, deepen your self awareness, and equip you to lead with clarity and conviction. You can find IQ for Leaders on Amazon and learn more about Dr. Greg Stewart's work at his websites, which we'll include in the show link. If this episode resonated with you, share it with your fellow leaders, subscribe, leave a review, and please keep us and these transformational conversations going. Until next time, lead boldly, feel deeply, and never stop becoming more. Thank you, Greg, for being a guest.
God bless you, brother, and thank you for having me. Take care now.
Thanks.